This is the second one this morning after, but it's actually the first from points of relevance. When I first got to Dallas, a couple things happened, but among the things that happened is when I left the Salvation Army, I met somebody. She told me that they had a law library at SMU University that was accessible to the public. She actually showed me where it was, and I went there. Within my first week to 10 days of being in Dallas, I did a bunch of research in that library. By and large, it's a very fine library. Don't get me wrong. It's a very fine, good library. But there were some things in there that were concerning because I had also been in the library of the Texas Archives in Austin. I compared some of the materials I found at the archives in Austin with what were supposed to be the same materials at the law library at SMU. There were some inconsistencies, let's put it that way. But the major thing is that from what I've been able to understand, a little over 100 years ago, now we're in the 101st year, SMU engaged a project, a construction project, and they did it as part of a public charter with the city of Dallas. My understanding is the bond for the construction of those facilities was actually paid for by the city, right? It's a public bond. And that's part of the connection of the university's library facilities being made available to the public. They do this thing in Texas, and I have plenty of evidence of it, a variety of different milieus. They got this 99-year lease arrangement. Now, during the 20th century, at a certain point in time, my understanding is they stopped doing that. But it used to be very common to set up 99-year leases in Texas. As a matter of fact, there are a couple of facilities around Dallas I've already been able to identify through some of the historical records. They're still on those 99-year leases, some of which are come and due, right? But my concern is that what happened is they set up 99-year leases on 100-year bonds. And so one of the things I've been seeing in the last couple of years is a couple of facilities, and some of them are religious, some of them are secular, some of them are public, some of them are presumed private. But my concern is what they would do is they would set up a 99-year lease with a 100-year bond, and they would do them at the same time. So that lease would come due in 99 years, and what it would do is it would create some kind of tragedy or catastrophe. So right before the term came due on that 100-year bond, well, you got to readjust. Well, there was a tragedy. There was some kind of calamity. So what you were expecting to yield on the maturation of that 100-year, well, it doesn't turn out quite like you thought, right? And then the question is, well, do you roll it over into a new bond? And if you do, what's the characterization of the new bond you roll it over into? And what kind of terms are you willing to accept if you remember that you and your family or your network had a certain intention and a certain understanding when you commenced that original 100-year bond? How many people are alive long enough to actually bear a 100-year bond? Not many. It's the kind of thing you hold over successive generations of your family. You can do different things at different times with them. The understanding is you're making a long-term investment in your family, in your community. You don't take out a 100-year bond just because you want to go to the casino or even because you want to build a casino. There's other things you do with something like that, including what I've seen more recently. 100-year bonds are used for other shorter-term bonds. And by shorter term, I mean a bond up to 60 years. So there's a lot riding on it. Now, even if we don't do it as much now as we used to do it, they used to do it with some frequency. And the thing is another thing that I've learned about Dallas is there was a period of time around the issuance of the original Liberty bonds where there was a bust here in Dallas. There was alleged to be a bank, and there was alleged to be a network of people identified as being in organized crime, including in organized crime during a time when organized crime was specifically identifiable with certain ethnic backgrounds, if you know what I mean, including, in this case, ethnic backgrounds that were in a very significant minority in Texas. And some people from that network got busted because presumably they were creating and issuing fake Liberty bonds. Now, they got busted, And it was alleged that some of those bonds got confiscated. But my concern is not all of them. My concern is that that bust was just the tip of the iceberg. That there were actually a lot of bond hustlers right here in Dallas, including bond hustlers that were making fake Liberty bonds. The thing is, the original Liberty bonds were 100-year bonds too. And they were 100-year federal bonds. And with the history the state of Texas has connected to bonds issued by the state versus what happens when the state of Texas becomes involved with bonds issued by the federal treasury, we've got a very, very significant history. My understanding is when Texas was annexed and became a state, that the Treasury Department took the bonds that had originally been issued by Texas. But after Texas made this deal with Treasury said, okay, well, now we're going to readjust the rates. And not only are we going to readjust the rates before anybody can get paid, everybody that's due has to agree to remove liability from the government based upon what happens. Now, I contend this is a huge, huge controversy nobody's really gotten into, even here in Texas. I believe there were people that did not agree. And then there were people that did not agree because of bad faith reasons, including because of whatever Treasury meant when it said, wait a second, we're taking your bonds, but we're readjusting the rates, and we don't want any responsibility for what you did, right? This is a huge, huge controversy. It persists to this day. But I also believe that it's part of some gamesmanship that insiders that have certain information have been working with ever since. And it's one of the reasons Texas has such a disproportionate influence, not just domestically within the United States, but internationally, including why policies Texas set up around the gas and oil industry, which are really unique in all the world, have been allowed to have a disproportionate impact. If somebody doesn't want to tell the story about that. So whatever that little relatively small-time bust of bonds was when they were busting those fake Liberty bond issues here in Dallas, I contend that was just insurance. That they were issuing a lot of fake federal bonds out of Dallas, out of northern Texas at that time. And there are people who know them. The thing is, last 5 years and now would be the time those bonds would be coming due. And by and large, you're not going to be able to cash those bonds in the United States. You're going to have to go outside the country to cash them in. Who's letting them get cashed in? Who's letting them get cashed in? Because then there's the other matter of, did they issue fake 100-year bonds with real 99-year leases? And are we in a situation where we're dealing with that? You got to understand, a lot of these 99-year leases, I've seen records where people donated real estate that was on a 99-year lease. You got real estate that was acquired by your network based on a donation. It was on a 99-year lease, but they kept that 100-year bond. What happens when your lease comes due? I think that's the situation we're in right now in Texas. And we may be in a situation where a lot of people got strung along, thinking that they had, let's put it this way, they gotten in good. They got a good deal. And so this whole concept of you didn't donate it. They donated you. Well, if they bonded the bonds to a person in their network, but then they donated the lease of that building they bonded it to, what do you think that does to your daughter? And I think that's exactly, at least in some part of the Texas gas and oil model, including all of that hard work some of those first daughters did regarding mental health care, right? Well, her dad, her family is very successful in their oil prospecting. The problem is she keeps hearing voices. Strange things keep happening. She has information, well, Daddy doesn't want anybody having her talk about. But don't worry, after she takes that trip to New York just in time for that Liberty Bond issue, well, she comes back and becomes a patroness of mental health care. And now mental health care, gas and oil production go hand in hand, if you know what I mean, right? The problem is a lot of that shit's turning over. And in the meantime, the stuff they hooked up locally, well, they've been trying to have deals all over the place set up. And the question is, did those countries know? Are you in a situation, if you're in another country right now, where somebody's trying to get you to honor a fake bond that's illegal for them to cash in the United States? I contend that's exactly what's happening. And in the meantime, last 5 to 10 years, there were actual real Liberty bonds that needed to be paid. And my understanding is if you don't pay the real bond and you get hustled into paying the fake bond, there's some very, very significant consequences. Very significant consequences. And it's part of what we're dealing with right now. This bond scam isn't a joke. And if you didn't like the situs of the original bond you were to bear, and you wanted something a little more exotic, or you wanted something with a little more clout or European character along the way, it doesn't change the facts of the matter that you still got to take care of stuff locally too, right? And this is a big problem we're having because a lot of those things are coming due. My understanding is in the next couple of years that they had already tried to attend to this. When they were talking about how the gas and oil sector took out temporary 5-year loans, that this is part of what they were dealing with. They needed to convert. The problem is, during the term of COVID-19, they secretly refinanced a lot of those short-term loans and didn't tell anybody about it. So we've got this gulf of information because there are people who have the legit information that know that they're lying through their teeth and the government's covering up for them. Why? And meanwhile, they keep extending. Just a year here, just a year, 2 years here, just 3 years here. 3 years on a 5-year that turns into an 8-year comes at what term of that 100-year? And 100 years and 103 years is a big difference. 100 years and 105 years is a big difference. And in some cases, we're right now at that 105-year point, and we don't got a lot of time left, right?